Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan was a well-known Jewish philosopher, a longtime faculty member of the Jewish Theological Seminary and founder of the Reconstructionist movement. A number of years ago, I happened to meet his grandson, who told me a funny story. When he was getting married, his soon-to-be wife had gone to the airport to pick Rabbi Kaplan up. It's always nerve-wracking to meet the in-laws for the first time, but I doubt she could have prepared herself for the first question he would ask her when he got in the car. What is your conception of God? It sounds like a strange question as an introduction to one's fiance's grandfather, but it's actually a fairly strange question in the Jewish world in general. We don't often talk about God, let alone about how we understand the concept of God. The reality is there are many ways of thinking about God in our tradition, and the idea most often discussed is actually, I think, the least interesting. Besides, it's mostly borrowed from Greek philosophy. God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. This God is faced with the problem of evil, what philosophers call the theodicy. But it can simply be asked as, why do bad things happen to good people? This God is the God most people mean when they say they're atheist or agnostic. And I can understand why, in truth, because I feel the same way. I'm an atheist in regard to Greek gods such as Zeus or Poseidon, and I'm an atheist when it comes to the God that is described by the ancient Greek philosophers. But as I mentioned, not only is it not the sole Jewish conception of God, it's not even the authentic one. It's the God of Greek philosophy that was later popularized by medieval Jewish theologians. The God of the Torah is so much more dynamic and interesting. God isn't a logical abstract. Instead, God has real personality. God experiences anger and jealousy. God expresses patience and love. But God is not only personified, the God of the Torah is personable. Rationalists like the Rambam remind us that we are finite beings attempting to define the infinite. Anything we can say about God, he tells us, is inherently flawed. It's limited. We must recognize our limitations in trying to understand the Holy One, and that all the words we use to describe God are merely attributes. My own teacher, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, teaches that we get to know God the same way we would anyone else. We can observe the emotions and experiences we have when we engage in religious acts. In those moments, we can learn about God, just as I can learn about anyone from how they make me feel when I engage with them. Mystics like Rabbi Arthur Green teach that God is encountered in our experience of the world. Creation is revelation, he tells us. God is revealed in the world, and when we engage with it on a deeper level, we can experience God's presence in big and small ways. Pantheists like Baruch Spinoza teach that God and nature are one and the same. God is not a being acting outside the universe, causing things to happen. God is the universe. Everything that happens and every being it happens to, that is all God. The existentialists like Martin Buber teach that we can learn about God through experience, not proofs. When we relate to another, not as an it, an object to derive benefit from, but as a thou, someone or something we appreciate simply for its presence. In those moments, Buber tells us we encounter God. There are many, many more ways of thinking about God in our tradition than I can mention in one sermon, and I certainly can't give any of them the time or credit they deserve. Yet I want you to take away from this that there are a multitude of ways to understand God, even if as Jews we rarely speak about God at all. But it's important that we change this. In our parsha this week, we read the 10 Commandments. The very first of them we should all know well. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am the Lord your God. The second commandment is you shall have no other gods beside me. Interestingly enough, different religions count the 10 Commandments differently. If you look at the text, there are more than 10 things we are commanded. So some have to be grouped together. Some believe that I am the Lord your God is just a prologue, not a commandment. Others group it together with the command to not have any other gods. Our tradition is in fact the only one that holds they are both separate individual commandments. The Tzadok of Lublin, a Hasidic rabbi and important Jewish thinker of the 19th century, offers an explanation why. He taught that the first is separated from the second because it necessarily precedes it. An awareness of God, he argues, precedes every other command, because without an understanding of God, none of the rest of the mitzvot makes sense. This is why I think we need to do a better job of talking about God. Before we can articulate why we pray, we need to articulate who it is we are praying to. Tefillah, other than simply reading words from the Siddur because they're the words our ancestors spoke, it only makes sense as a religious act if we know to whom we are praying. Keeping kosher, following an ancient set of dietary restrictions, can simply be a cultural phenomenon. We do it because our parents and grandparents and those before them did so. But that's not a religious act, it's cultural. It's simply eating Jewish foods. It's similar to enjoying a corned beef sandwich at a deli or a bowl of matzo ball soup on a Friday night. But when we understand the one who commanded us to follow these laws, then and only then is it a religious act. We can say the same thing about other ritual mitzvot. Think of the mezuzah. Is it simply Jewish art? Is it something that Jews hang in their home because that's what Jews do? Or is it because we are in a relationship with the one who commanded it? The same act can mean very different things. Understanding who is commanding us isn't relevant just to the ritual mitzvot, but the ethical ones as well. Giving tzedakah can simply be being a good person, but not a religious act. The same goes for visiting the sick, feeding the hungry, or clothing the naked. They are the right things to do, but anyone, Jewish or not, can do them for that reason. They're moral. They're good acts. But when we know the one who commanded them, when we ourselves hear that command, then they become a religious act. We need to do a better job of talking about God. There are so many different ways of understanding the absolute, of experiencing the absolute. I'm not here today to tell you what you should think of God, but only that you must think about the question. You must find the answer that speaks to you, the answer that lets you hear the command, Anochi Adonai Elohecha. The answer that you can honestly say lets you recognize the one who calls those words out to you. We are in danger not only from those outside who hate us, but also from within. We are in danger of letting our Judaism become merely a cultural phenomenon. If we don't know who it is that commands us to observe these laws, even if we do observe them, they're not religious acts. We can do better. Moses may have come down from Mount Sinai with the tablets, but God spoke these words, these commandments, to all the Israelites. Knowledge of God, the experience of the Holy One, it was never reserved for just the leadership or the priests. God spoke to every single Israelite. And today, God speaks to all of us as well. Having a relationship with God is not reserved for rabbis and cantors, but every single Jew. Yet to be in a relationship with someone, you have to know who they are. We have to do a better job of talking about God. One of the beautiful things about our tradition is that we don't all have to agree on the same answer, but we must ask the question. This Shabbat, may each of us begin to think about our own answers to this question. May we help one another to hear the one who called to our ancestors in the desert of Sinai. May we hear the one who is calling to each of us today. Shabbat Shalom.